All right, so I guess that somehow that brings us to the film discussion portion of the podcast. So, anybody who's unfamiliar with the show, how this works is I used to have a movie recommendation show on my YouTube channel, and it would get flagged for copyright all the time because I would show clips. I should have uploaded to Pornhub. Advice was
Yeah.
a few years
Yes.
too late. Uh, and I also just hated the sound of my own voice reading off a script. So, but I still wanted to do film discussion, so that's why we have this show. So every episode, I recommend the guest a movie, the guest recommends me a movie, or in this case, guests, and then we discuss what the movies were. So, as I'm sure you've gathered by the title, Brennan recommended Thunder Road by Jim Cummings. Rob recommended Mean Guns. I forget who directed it, but Ice-T, I guess we can credit that with.
Yeah, he was directing and writing that movie.
And then I recommended Neil Breen's Fateful Findings. So I guess, do we want to start with the good movie and work our way down?
I mean, that depends. Which one is the good movie?
All right, so Fateful Findings is about. Let's start with Thunder Road. So Brennan, tell a little bit about Thunder Road, and then bear in mind also that we'll talk a little bit about we'll talk a little non-spoilers, and then we'll have a moment where we'll let everyone pause and go watch the movie in case they still haven't seen it by the time this comes out. So, what is Thunder Road about?
Thunder Road is a really good movie, in my opinion, about a police officer who just lost his mother or his stepmother. It's kind of unclear to me, at least. His mother. Okay, fair enough. But it is a movie about a guy who is just grieving with the loss of his mother, as well as trying to be a father to his child that does not feel super close to him. And it's kind of just about the very sad and very funny ways in which grief can affect you in the rest of your life, and a bunch of other stuff.
So, because you had mentioned it a little bit when we recorded our last episode, and because we were drawing comparisons to Marriage Story, because that was one movie that I kind of enjoyed from the past year. And you were saying about how it had a lot of similar themes, but it did them better. So I guess, and I do kind of see what you mean, but the one thing that you mentioned in the last episode we recorded was that one of the problems you had with Marriage Story and a lot of other movies made by Rian Johnson as a whole is that it feels like when he's writing, he had an argument with somebody years back, and he's like, "Oh, now I have a chance to be right in my argument by writing it into the script." And
now I'm excited. Yeah, where do you feel like that is present in that movie? Just because I'm curious about that.
A little bit throughout, but it's definitely that's definitely not a knock, because I think that while Marriage Story has moments where I'm like, oh, that's really good. I think Thunder Road was kind of consistently throughout. I was like, oh, this is good. I'm not. There's no Marriage Story loses me at points, and Thunder Road didn't really lose me. So,
but no, I guess there's a lot to dig into, but you just mentioned that specifically. So I am curious about that. What is the points of the movie that you feel like were made because the Jim Cummings, I guess, as it were, was trying to re-win an argument?
There were the only one that's really coming to mind right now. I don't want to say exactly what it is yet because it's a spoiler, but the very end, the last conversation he has with the last conversation he has with his ex-wife, and then the conversation he has with his daughter outside the house. I was a little bit like, this is a little too
Brennan,
poetic.
You just got. Oh my gosh! Brennan really in the bear trap right
but
now.
I will say though, I really enjoyed the funeral scene. I was just kind of in awe, in all the right ways, in every way that he intended for me to be in awe. And I really, really, really enjoyed the scene where he's outside the police station and he's yelling at everybody.
Yeah, dude.
Those are my two hands down favorite parts of that entire movie.
That scene is just so strong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
are you
Rob,
talking about the funeral, or are you talking about the outside the police station?
Well, I think outside the police station. I mean, the funeral scene is what the movie. So the movie is based off of an original YouTube short he did.
Nope.
Yeah.
Not a YouTube short.
Was it like
It's a
Vimeo
short
or
film
something?
that was on YouTube.
It's on Vimeo. Whatever, we can.
Are you fucking okay?
That's where the classy film students
so
put their
sorry.
projects.
I'm so sorry. It was a 10-minute short on Vimeo of the funeral scene.
Caught you in the bear trap,
and
Rob.
also Jim Cummings. I'm on his YouTube page right now. He has YouTube. All right, so it's
I'm sure he has YouTube.
Does he also have one on
scene,
YouTube?
No, it is not. The original is not on YouTube for some reason.
And I will say, for a minute though, Brennan, when you mentioned it, and I heard Jim Cummings, for a split second, I was like, Winnie the Pooh, the guy who does.
Yeah. Wait, what?
The guy the guy who does Winnie the Pooh is, I think his last name is Cummings. I forget what his first name is, but for a second I thought
Cummings.
No. It's what's his name? Sorry, Rob, you were saying. Go on with your point. I'm gonna look this up.
Yeah, I'll do my thing again. So it's the scene outside of the police station where he is like, he's doing that thing we've all done where we're embarrassed in front of a group of people and we start calling people out for their bullshit. Yeah. And every time he tries it, he just is like rebuffed with like, hey man, I like really tried to support you. Yeah. And he's like forced to be like, oh,
and I really appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean,
it's so good
like,
though.
I brought you coffee. Thank you so much for that, Larry. But fuck you right now. It really meant a lot to me, Larry. You have no idea.
But fuck you right now.
That kind of stuff. Well, but also, but let's not forget that the build up to that, and I don't want to spoil it, but the
reveal, that reveal
is incredible. That is an incredible, like from the very beginning of that all the way through the end where he walks off, like incredible filmmaking. I want everyone who listens to this, all 3-4 million people we have listening right now, go to YouTube and look up Jim Cummings, go to his channel, and watch his short film called It's All Right, It's Okay. It's All Right.
Oh, that is good. That is good.
Cummings
is it like a similar kind of vibe, or?
It's a very, very similar vibe.
Okay.
And Jim Cummings he's making a movie right now. I think it's called The Werewolf. So like, watch out for him, dude. He's gonna be big. Like he wrote and directed Thunder Road. Like, he's awesome. He's truly like one of my favorite people right now. That's in my top movies.
Yeah. So with like that scene that we were talking about, I mean, obviously the opening scene is a really good example of like the weird, uncontrollable like way that grief works and everything like that. But I think the scene, Rob pointed out outside the police station is also a really good point of that, because he is lashing out at all those people, but at a certain point, he's just like, I found out she lost her boyfriend in Vietnam. He starts talking about his mom and everything.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it really slips away from him. And like, that is like so true to what that sadness is.
And that's also kind of like consistent with him throughout the whole movie too.
Well, you don't know, like when you're feeling those emotions, it's like, you can't get away from those like personally, I couldn't get away from my feelings I had when my dad died. And so like I would be saying totally normal things with like very weird emotional messages behind them for sure. And I don't know the whole thing, but I'm sure that he is very aware of like all the things he tackles in that movie, grief, loss, acceptance, like everything. I'm sure he's been through it.
And on that same kind of on that tip a little bit, and just to kind of bring it back around to what you were saying, Jacob, about like the ending of the movie and the argument thing there, I would say there's a definite thing to be said that aside from maybe having some like severe alcohol abuse, I think he's a bipolar man, or he's got some sort of mental illness, and there's something to be said for that. So when you talk about like him trying to, I understand in the one instance that it's very one-sided that you're referring to, because, somebody else can't necessarily speak for themselves. But I would also say that I think those two scenes aren't necessarily – I would say those two scenes and a lot of the scenes in the movie aren't necessarily ever meant to make this guy look like a model citizen or a good person. Well, a good person, but just like a guy who, does not have it together and is not necessarily a role model by any means,
Yeah.
So that's what
Also-
that's my only kind of pushback to that right there.
Can I? Or we're talking about like how Ryan Johnson. Oh no,
You did it. You've done it.
No.
You've done it, you fool.
Jacob,
the
you've
curse
got to
is
cut
broken.
that out.
Now
No,
each of
yeah.
us have been in the bear trap.
We're talking about that, like Rian Johnson, like made a movie basically, like to get finish a Twitter argument.
Oh,
right?
Knives
That's what
Out.
we're getting
Yes.
at.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like I would say maybe with this movie, like I'll give him a pass on that one because the argument he might be trying to finish is just, hey, like I was just in a place, and anyone who thought I was like losing my mind, I was just in this place that you can't possibly understand.
Right. Yeah, and it is like I said, it's definitely I will admit that this is definitely the better movie between that and Marriage Story, but I think that it definitely in that area there is at least some kind of similar vibe, whether that be coming from the same place or not. I think it's definitely not in that case. Like it's not from a place of like, ha, I win, but it's like it is coming from like I wish maybe I could go back and change what I said or how I acted. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of that. Like, it's so I don't think it.
Oh, and then also
I guess
really
there's
quick.
cringe.
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
no,
No. You continue.
No, yeah, really quick. It is the Winnie the Pooh is also Jim Cummings. It's
Oh,
the same
interesting.
name. So that's what was confusing me at first. Okay, sorry.
Okay, good to
Continue.
He's immortal.
Yeah, he is immortal. No, I mean the opening scene is the key to the whole movie. I mean,
Yeah.
like that's really like where you get in there, and I think it's also just important, just from like an aspiring filmmaker perspective. As we mentioned before, that this opening scene, not the one we see in the movie, but basically that script was the short film, and
So
then
beat by beat, the
Yes.
same thing.
there's almost, because the
I think
very
it's like the
important thing
music
is
is
just that the
different.
music is not
Yeah.
in the actual movie,
Right.
because
Licensing
and you can
and
look.
all
Yes, well, I mean licensing, but the way they kind of frame it is that they did 6 takes one way and 6 takes the other, and the last take was the take they saw in the movie, and it was just good enough that they were like, well, that makes that a lot easier because then we don't have to go after the licensing or
that.
whatever.
Right, yeah.
And Bruce Springsteen actually has said that he liked the movie, which I think is like pretty cool, just like a knock on the whole thing. And it's like, as I'm like a fan of like I'm a pretty big fan of Springsteen. My mom's a pretty big fan of Springsteen. That opening really does stick out to me in a lot of ways. There's the part where he talks about his mom, the fact that he couldn't read well. He's dyslexic, and he talks about the fact that his mom, when he went away to college, would like record all of it, like read all of his textbooks and record that.
That whole
God,
scene
that's
is
right.
that whole scene is just such
it's
a heartbreaking
it's
thing.
punch after punch, and
Yeah.
it makes you like want to hug your mom and like text your mom or do whatever you can, like the second after you see it.
There's
because
so
it
many
really-
moments in that entire movie too, even down to like his friend when he after that big breakdown happens in the middle and his friend comes over and his friend feels like he has to call his wife after talking with him for 5 minutes. It's just like there's so many moments like that.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean that scene too is so funny where he's like, "I'm sorry if I did a hate crime on you."
Oh yeah.
Oh my god! Yeah, that's something else about it. Yeah, the one thing I really took away from the movie, other than the really his excellent performance, and a lot of the supporting cast too, the little girl especially, like one of my biggest pet
She's
peeves
fantastic.
is one of my biggest pet peeves in a movie is if you have this like you have this story where children are like a big motivating force. They're like one of the main aspects of the movie, and you have to have them say or deal with really dramatic things, and they like 9 times out of 10 they just can't. But the little girl in this movie I think was amazing. She did a fantastic job.
Yeah,
It's
she's so
a
good.
testament to like whenever Hollywood is like, oh well, it's a child actor, so they don't need to act. It's like, fuck you.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
You can absolutely find kids to get in these roles, which once again investigate filmmakers, but you can find children who can play these roles.
Mhm.
Well,
I mean-
yeah, and I mean, once again, that's a knock that I will have later on against your movie, Rob.
Whoa!
for sure.
'Cause I was about to say that the movie I brought to the table actually reinforces what I just said.
Hmm.
So
Okay, so
All right,
I'm
well-
going to attack you. Well, I would like to say just a little bit more about Thunderbird.
Yeah.
specifically
Let's hold off on that
with
for
that-
now.
With
Yeah.
that girl, her delivery of the like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
okay, where she's like impressed with her dad having learned the game, and the fact that like you see that like he has been doing it on the wall.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it means so much to him. This
Just to
trivial
connect.
thing.
Yeah, just because there's that heartbreaking scene where he says "I love you," and then she like doesn't say anything back, and he
Yeah.
just lingers out in the hallway, and it's like, oh, this poor man. So many great lines in the movie. Maybe the funniest line is where he picks his daughter up from his ex-wife's house, and they're having a bit of a spat as the daughter gets into the car, and he tells his ex-wife, hey, just like don't like there's some construction up the road. I just want you to be careful. I would really hate for you and Greg to get hit by a fucking train.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Well, then, doesn't he follow that up by getting in the car? He's like, I didn't mean that, sweetie. Like, I'm just
something like that. Yeah. I think my two favorite lines, hands down, one of them's not even a line. It's just a moment where he's dropping off his daughter back at the mom's house, and the stepdad comes out, and the stepdad's like, hey, I thought, did she tell you about, and then he starts rolling up the window before the guy can even finish, and he just scowls at him. I love that moment so much. And then the other favorite line I really liked the early on, I think almost immediately after the funeral scene, they're outside of like a convenience store, and there's some drunk guy like kickboxing with the air, and he's like, they don't know, and then they call that back later with his big breakdown, because I think he verbatim says a couple times where he's talking like, I was trying to look like a good dad, and they don't know, like that was a really smart. It just reinforces that whole scene is amazingly performed and really well written.
Well, that scene
amazing.
Right after the funeral, with that guy and his partner, the homeless guy or the mentally ill man or whatever. Yeah. And he's like getting dressed down by his chief, and he's trying to play it off cool in front of the rest of the officers. And then he like comes back and like lingers for a bit. He's like, yep. And then his chief is like, get out of here. He's like, all right,
I'm going. Yeah. He starts,
I'll see you guys on the 9th.
Taking long steps away. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so good.
Well, I wanted to say, because I did not watch it today or in the recent months, because I did not realize that was also one of the movies. I will say, and I haven't seen it recently, so I can't give full context, but the scene at the parent-teacher conference with Macon Blair, another like.
I was really happy when he.
Man.
I was really happy when he popped up.
Oh yeah, I love him. I love seeing him and stuff.
He's great.
Watch out, Macon Blair, Blue Ruin, Green Room.
What's the other one that he
Logan
did?
Lucky.
Murder.
Logan Lucky for a second.
Is that another
Murder Party? Murder Party is the original one that he made with his like original crew.
Jeremy
that
Saulnier.
is good.
Which is the other? Wasn't he in another one that Jeremy Saulnier did recently that wasn't as well received as Green Room or Blue Ruin?
I didn't like Hold the Dark. He might have been in Hold the Dark.
Yeah. I haven't seen that yet.
He wrote and directed, I believe, I Don't Feel at Home in This World Anymore.
Yes, he did.
And that's really good. That's really good. Those are both produced by Film Science, which around the time that I kind of picked up on A24 as like, hey, that's a production card that comes on before a lot of movies I like. Film Science, I think, might just specifically be Jeremy Saulnier, however you say his name.
Saulnier, I think.
Yeah. That might be his production company with Macon Blair or whatever, because I know that they're friends. But that is another one that, like, if it just pops up beforehand, I'm on board. On Hold the Dark, real quick. I didn't love the movie as a whole, but there is that scene where a Native American guy on a reservation is just lighting up a bunch of police officers with a machine gun, and it's like one of the most like kind of gut-turning, intense action scenes I've seen in a movie in a while, and that really sticks out because I just don't. It's a movie that I don't love as a whole, and really don't feel like it sticks the landing. But it's also based on something else, and I really have liked his original stuff more than anything that he's done based on something else. He also did. Sorry to keep doing it. He also directed a couple episodes in season 3 of True Detective, and I think those episodes also really specifically stick out.
I would agree with that. I think check out those movies. Back to Thunder Road. I just noticed that PTA meeting is very it's another one of those things where it's like you don't know these emotions and feelings unless you have felt them, and he's able to put it on camera, and it's just this feeling of like a parent being like, I'm not even as smart as my daughter. How do I fix this? Like, I don't even, I don't even know what to do here. She's the one that I go to for answers. And like Macon Blair just being like, there's nothing I can do, and clearly there's nothing you can do. So what do we even?
Right.
I think I think he ends it with like, what do we do here or something? Like,
Yeah, I think that scene is also a good kind of like recontextualization in the movie that like sits you with Jim Cummings' character for most of the movie. That like you become sympathetic with him, but when you see like somebody like Macon Blair, who's like obviously a very grounded person, isn't a police officer, is just a teacher, kind of like just a neutral third party, and you see how those two people interact, it really kind of puts into perspective how like unhinged Jim Cummings is emotionally and everything like that. And like when he's like, can you like please he's like he's like about to throw the desk across the room.
Just don't talk to me. Don't talk to me.
Don't.
Yeah.
I'd rather you don't. Yeah, it's like your daughters or whatever. Yeah, and that's just so good. Honestly,
it's your daughter's desk, and he starts like trying to put all this stuff back in it.
Yeah,
there we go.
I could,
now I remember.
I only have one other thing that I would like to say about the movie, but it would actually it's a negative thing, but
police lives matter.
I would also say that there's a spoiler involved in it.
Okay, yeah, if we want to use this to get into spoilers, yeah. So if you haven't seen Thunder Road, definitely check it out. It's free on Amazon Prime.
Alert!
Yeah. I need to come up with some sort of graphic to play right when we get to that point so people don't...
Well, I just gave you the sound
Yeah,
bite.
exactly. Yeah, I'll just copy you
Get on board
into every episode. But yeah, so if you haven't seen Thunder Road, it's on Amazon Prime. You can rent it on most other platforms for no more than like $5. You don't have an excuse not to see it. It's fantastic. So, yeah, you were saying spoilers.
The only spoiler alert, or like problem I have, not spoiler. The problem I have with the movie in general is I didn't feel like there was a lot of evidence leading up to his wife's addiction. And so when that happens at the end, it kind of feels like an out of nowhere resolution to a movie for a character that might not necessarily deserve a resolution, but it is kind of thrust upon him because of the plot of the movie. But I also think maybe that might speak towards the fact that you don't necessarily see addiction. The way
I was about to rail against your point, saying like, you don't see addiction, but also, like with something like that, I mean, you have to look at it from like a movie perspective. Like, your Mom's House podcast uses the phrase white bummer. I mean, this is just a movie about like nothing goes right for people sometimes.
Yeah.
Like sometimes just every horrible thing that could happen happens. But I think the most important thing about that is like you don't see addiction, and this is like a real movie. It's not even about the mom. She just happens to like. I'm sure if we got her movie, like if we got her prequel movie, I bet we'd see her doing more heroin and probably smoking more crack than Harvey Keitel and Bad Lieutenant.
I'm also not ruling out that
Jim Cummings killed her and staged it.
No, come on now. I don't want that. I don't even want to entertain that. I'm not ruling out that like because he's a police officer and like because they like split up that it might have been because of her addiction and everything.
Oh, you mean how like the divorcees of firemen like are the most likely to have their houses burned down?
I think
I don't know these statistics.
There's I think one thing kind of going off of that I thought was kind of a theme of the movie is like I forget which one of you touched on it, but the whole thing of him feeling like powerless, like if my daughter is like the person I go to for when I don't know what to do, and if I can't rely on her, what do I have? There are a couple moments throughout the movie where he just gets blindsided by things, and I think that is kind of meant to, like, the whole not seeing the wife being addicted to drugs is kind of meant to reinforce that, like the whole girl going in.
Ooh, good point.
Like when she goes in the first day of school and she has the makeup on, like there was never a moment where we saw her like looking at like a little girl magazine being like, oh man, that's the coolest new palette, I want to go with that.
That's so valid.
So
yeah, that's just, it's just inferred she would have seen that because she's a normal person,
right? And so much of that,
that's true.
And also, like you said, so much of the movie is him kind of like dealing with what's going on inside his own head. And I think a lot of times when we're stuck inside our own perspective, or we're like dealing with all these huge thoughts, we do kind of become oblivious to the world around us a little bit. So that could have just been another thing of like, he didn't notice it because he was so preoccupied with like, oh man, my mom just died, and I got to fight I want to have joint custody because it's important to see her mom. It just like he just blocks some stuff out. So it's such a real thing where it's like you go through a loss like that, and there is no pause button for the world around you, and you spend a lot of time looking for a pause button. And just being like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, Yeah.
Well, I mean, right now is a pretty good example of that. Like, Rob, I've been laid off from work, so I kind of am on, like, not vacation, because life is hell not being able to, like, afford shit or whatever, but, like, you, however, like, have to keep fucking working through all this. Jacob, you have to keep working through all this. So, I mean, there's no pause button for, like, the crisis outside of us. It's kind of wild as hell.
Yeah, it definitely is. But
I would love to get laid off. Just kidding.
I would not.
I'm
Jacob,
very happy.
Send it to his boss.
Yeah. Clara, I'm very happy with my position. Thank you.